Everyone, this is Dr. Harun Ahmed again. In this video, we're going to talk about cell membrane and the transport of molecules and the way and mechanism by which the transport happens across these cell membranes. Alright, so let's jump into the details. So as you can see, a cell, this is a cell, and so the inside of this cell is called the cytoplasm, is separated from the outside of the cell through a membrane or a wall. This wall is called a cell membrane or plasma cell membrane. Alright, so the reason why it's critical is because the composition of the inside of the cell varies from the outside of the cell. So this fluid is different in composition to the fluid surrounding the cell, which is why and the composition of this fluid is critical for the cell. So this cell membrane helps to keep the inside separate from the outside, if that makes sense. Alright, so learning objectives in this presentation are to describe of the fluid mosaic model of membrane structure and explain the underlying reason for this for this structure. Then we need to understand the role of phospholipid, cholesterol, glycolipids, proteins, and glycoproteins in membrane. We will outline the role of plasma membrane and the role of membrane within cells. Then we will describe and explain how molecules can get in and out of cells across cell membrane by the process of diffusion, facilitated diffusion, osmosis, active transport, endocytosis, and exocytosis. These are the methods by which transport across this wall or the cell membrane happens. We will describe the effects of animal and plant cells of immersion in solution of different water concentration. So if you okay, we'll discuss it later, otherwise you're going to get confused now. We'll describe the features of gases exchange across the surface of mammalian lungs. We will also describe the features of root hairs that enable uptake of ions by active transport. All right, so keywords we should know: phospholipids, solution, pinocytosis, polar, solute. All these different keywords, I will explain them when they come up during the presentation. So at this time you just need to know these are different keywords, and if they confuse you, please leave your question in the comment section and I'll try to get back to you as soon as I can. Alright, so cell membrane, all living things, or should say cells, are surrounded by a membrane. The cell membrane is also known as plasma membrane or cell membrane, or just a membrane. Controls exchange of materials such as nutrients and waste between cell and their environment. Has other important functions, for example, to enable cells to receive hormones from outside of the cell. For instance, growth hormones. To understand the function of anything biology, you must study the cell structure first. The reason behind that is cells are the building blocks of life. So if you do not understand the cells and the structures or the components of a cell, which includes the cell membrane, then you are not going to have in-depth understanding of biology and life itself. Alright, so a cell membrane from opposing neurons. Alright, so these are nerve cells, and these are the different. So this is the cell membrane of one neural cells, so neural cells are just a kind of cell at this stage. So this inside of one cell and the inside of another cell, and this is the cell membrane of this cell, the blue cell, sky blue cell, and this is the cell membrane of the green cell. And there is this gap between the two membranes, and hence, if anything, any communication has to happen between the two cells, it has to happen through these cell membranes. This is just to show you how critical the cell membranes are. So in this case, it separates the two different cells. Alright, so cell membrane are basically made of phospholipids. You can see, so phospholipids have a hydrophilic head and a hydrophobic tail. And all right, so at this stage you need to understand this, and we'll explain this later, but this stage you just need to know that the phospholipids have a hydrophobic head and a hydrophilic tail. Alright, so phospholipids are an important structure component of cell membrane. Phospholipids are modified so that a phosphate group, which is replaces one of the 3 fatty acids normally found on a lipid. The addition of this group makes a polar head and 2 non-polar tails. So this is the head, as we discussed in previous slide, and these are the tails. So hydrophilic, so the head is hydrophilic, and the other end of the phospholipid is a hydrophobic group, and several double bond oxygen. The atom at this end of the molecule are not shared equally. This end of the molecule has a charge and is attracted to water. It is polar. So the head of these phospholipids are water loving, so they are usually facing the side of the cell membrane which has water on it. So I assume you would have got it by now. So the head faces either the outside of the cell or the inside of the cell. So on the outside and the inside there is a watery environment, so the head will face the outside, and then the tails, they are hydrophobic, so they do not like water, so they has to be away from water. So the 2 long chains coming off the bottom of this molecule are made of carbon and hydrogen, because both of these elements share their electron evenly. These chains have no charge. They are non-polar molecules with no charge and are not attracted to water. As a result, water molecules tend to push them out of the way as they are attracted to each other. This causes molecules with no charge not to dissolve in water. That's a lot of technical knowledge, but the explanation is they try to get themselves away. So these 2 tails, they try to get themselves away from water. This brings us to a phospholipid bilayer. So all that previous explanation was so that you understand the bilayer formation of a membrane. So this is one phospholipid, this is a second phospholipid. So the head faces the water. Assuming this is the outside of the cell, the head faces the water, and this outside will have watery environment. The head, which loves water, will face outside. The tail, which hates water, will be on the inside. This is the second phospholipid, and this is the inside of a cell, so that it will face the watery environment here. The head, the tail will protrude away from the watery molecule. So the tail, so at the end, because of the arrangement, the tails will face each other and the head will be away from each other, and this is called and when this happens in sequence, it forms the whole complete cell membrane. So a cell membrane, so as we said, cell is the basic component of all living organism, and in that way the phospholipids can be termed as a basic component or a structural component of a cell membrane. So cell membrane is made of primarily the structure component of the cell membrane are phospholipids, and they organize themselves in a bilayer with the tails facing each other and the heads protruding away towards the watery environment. As I said, the phospholipids bilayer is the basic structure of cell membrane. Alright, this is another cross-sectional view. We can see if we assume this is the aqueous environment, assuming this is the outside of the cell and this is the inside of the cell, which is again aqueous or watery environment. So the water-loving heads facing the watery environment. As you can see, the polar hydrophilic means water loving, they're facing the outside, and the hydrophobic or non-polar, or water hating or water not liking, or they don't like water, so they are on the inside where there is less water in the sandwich. All right, these are other different diagrams of the cell structure. So if you look at it, if the phospholipids are organized themselves in a circle, then they will be like this: the heads outside, tails inside. If we enlarge the circle, it will be like that. And if you look at the state form, it look like this, cross-sectional form like that. So assuming this, so a cell generally looks like this. So these are bilayers, cell membrane, and cytoplasm and nucleus. All right. This is another diagram of a cell membrane. You can see one phospholipid, another phospholipid, one, two. These are phospholipids, and they see the heads are outside, the tails are inside. This term is a bilayer, and these other proteins, these are proteins, the other components of a cell membrane, but we're not going to discuss them at this point. But generally speaking, so the basic structure unit are these phospholipids, but there are other components which can be termed as which are known as so all right, let's get into it. Anyway, so these are the proteins beside these phospholipids. The membrane proteins, channel proteins, so they're responsible usually for transport. They're like gates in a wall. They are cholesterol molecules, and they are glycoproteins, which are responsible for signaling across the cell membrane. But we will discuss this in details later. Alright, so what is a fluid mosaic model? So let's firstly read this. So cell membrane also contain protein within the phospholipid bilayer. The model for the structure of the membrane is called fluid mosaic model. Fluid because individual phospholipids and proteins can move around freely within the layer like it is a fluid. Mosaic because of the pattern produced by the scattered protein molecules when the molecule is viewed from above. It's self-explanatory, but yeah, all the previous explanation we did actually describes the fluid mosaic model. So it's called fluid because it moves like a fluid. The membrane is not a stagnant rigid structure, and mosaic because of the pattern produced by the scattered protein. Hope that makes sense. So according to this model, the lipid bilayer organizes itself into a bilayer with the tails facing each other and the heads protruding on the outside. That is the simple explanation. So yeah, this arrangement of lipid bilayer gives rise to the fluid mosaic model, and even in this model we also have the organization of proteins. You can see the channel proteins and glycoproteins. So diagram of a cell membrane. Again, this is just an illustration. These are proteins and cholesterol involved outside the cell. This is the inside of the cell, but the main component, the structure component, are again these lipid phospholipids. See, one phospholipid, another phospholipid facing each other, tails inside, heads outside. They form the structure components, and then there are gates, which are these proteins, and glycoproteins and other functional units of a cell membrane. That's how it's a better term for it. So the other components are functional, while the phospholipid is like the structure. Like phospholipid are like the bricks, and the other components can be gates or windows or can be described something like those. But the main component are the phospholipids, which are controlled, which can be explained through the fluid mosaic model as we explained earlier. So alright, so this is just another diagram, or if we cut a cell membrane, how it's gonna look. We already saw this picture to see how neurons would look. Alright, so these are just some explanation. So double layer bilayer of phospholipids, which can move about by diffusion in their own monolayer. Phospholipid tail points inward, forming a non-polar hydrophilic interior, and you can read all of this by stopping the video, I guess. But yeah, this is just some basic facts. Alright, so what's the summary? So cell membrane have a basic structure composed of phospholipid bilayer. Phospholipids have hydrophobic non-polar tails and hydrophilic polar heads. The best model of the cell membrane is called the fluid mosaic model. The average thickness of the membrane is 7 nanometer. The fatty acid tail of phospholipid can be saturated straight or unsaturated bent. Protein can float or be fixed, and have hydrophilic portions. Some proteins and phospholipids have carbohydrates attached to them to form glycoproteins and glycolipids. Phospholipid form the bilayer, act as the barrier to most water-soluble substrate. Cholesterol regulates the fluidity of membrane and gives mechanical stability and helps to prevent ions from passing through the membrane. Membrane act as transport proteins to act as channel for substrate to move in and out the cell. Some act as membrane enzyme and some have important roles in cell membrane for organelles. Glycolipids and glycoproteins help to stabilize membrane structure. Some act as receptor molecules, for example, for hormones and neurotransmitter, or as antigen for other cell to recognize them. So, all in all, summary in my words, cell membrane, it has structure unit, or is composed of structure units which are phospholipids. Phospholipids are like bricks in a wall. So if you consider cell membrane as a wall, then the phospholipids are bricks, and it has some other components, functional components like proteins and cholesterols and other compounds which acts as functional units, and or you can term the proteins as gates, because they're responsible for transport. And there can be windows, just like in a wall there are windows. So in the membrane, there are some windows which, like glycoproteins, which help transport a message across the cell membrane. So this is just another diagram of how the gases pass through the cell membrane. So as I explained earlier, gases can pass freely through the cell membrane. It's like a wall cannot stop in flow of air, so the membrane can't stop the flow of air. Oxygen, carbon dioxide can exchange freely through this wall. All right. So, if you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comment. I'll try to get back to you as soon as I can. But in the meantime, enjoy learning. Watch YouTube videos. I find them really helpful. So good luck, and see you in the future.